Hi guys, in this lesson we're going to have a look at one of my favorite features, which is paint effects. So if we go to the modeling menu and go to generate, the paint effects commands are all here, and if I click on get brush, it's going to open up the content browser, and this is in Maya 2016 extension 2. If you're using an older version, you can go to Window, General Editors, Visor, and your paint effects will be in there. So you can see in the paint effects folder we've got different types of brushes. What I mainly use it for is to create complexity in the scene. So for example, you can grab flowers, or you can grab grass, for example, and we can move down to plants here, plants mesh. There's a bunch of plants here. There's underwater stuff as well, which I've used before, and there's also trees. Okay, so all this stuff is great for creating stuff really quickly, and the cool thing about this is that they're already animated, so they've got some movement in there which looks really cool. The other thing we use paint effects for is to create toon effects. So if we click on toon, we can assign these toon edges to any of our geometry. Then we've also got artistic brushes like pastels, for example, or paints. So we've got oils here. So you can pick on these and you can just paint with those. So if I just click on one of those, you can see I can just paint it there. And then when I press render, most of this stuff, if you look at it in the viewport, you won't be able to see it. You can try using viewport 2.0 or legacy. Sometimes the legacy one works a little bit better. So if I press render, you can see that the render will show that. It's come out green. Let's grab this red one, for example. So you can see it in the viewport better. If I press render, you can see it there. Okay, so that's basically what paint effects are used for, and what we'll do is we'll create a simple scene so that we can have a look at some of the features in more detail. So I'm going to go to the trees folder here, and I'm going to grab the tree leafy. Okay, so click on that, and then I'm going to just draw a stroke here. So I'm just going to do a stroke in the middle of my scene, click and drag with my left mouse button, and I get a teeny tiny little brush there. So the first thing is, how do we make this bigger? So it's the usual B for brush size. So if I hold down B and use my left mouse button, I can make this brush a bit bigger, and if I draw again, you can see now that I get a little bit of a bigger tree. In fact, I've got two there. We'll have a look at that in just a second. Let's have a look in the outliner. You can see that I've got my strokes there. So the stroke is basically what you drew, and this tube is what comes out of it. So this is how it grows, and what defines what that looks like is basically the brush. We picked the tree leafy brush, so we've got that attached to this stroke here. So let's have a look at where we would go to adjust this. If we select that, let's just go back to the select tool here. You can see here we've got a stroke and we've got a brush. Okay, so you can see it says stroke here and it says brush here. Okay, so the stroke has got lots of important parameters in there about how this thing will look and different ways of controlling the complexity of it. So with paint effects, you can quickly run into thousands of polygons, so you've got to be careful about how you show them in your scene. So if we just get rid of this original one here, and if I look at this one, for example, you can see that it says draw as mesh. So if I turn that off, I can actually draw this as a curve, and it actually plays a lot quicker. This one is not turned on at the moment, so the animation is not turned on. So we're going to show you that in just a second. So if I just select this again, turn on draw as mesh, and now it's back again. So when you do draw as mesh, if you turn that off, it still renders correctly. So if I press render, you can see it still renders correctly. It's just so that it shows a bit quicker in the viewport. So that's quite a useful feature. We can also actually turn off the quality. So if we turn off display quality and turn this down, you can see Maya is going to remove polygons as we slide this down. Okay, so if I press render, you can see that's still correct, but when you look at it in the viewport, it's basically removing polygons. So that's another way of controlling what you see in your viewport. Then we've got sample density, and that's basically how many trees are we going to get along this stroke. So if I turn this down, I'm going to get one. Okay, so if I turn this up, I can get more than one, and I can type in a number if I wanted something like 20. I can change the sample density to 20, and you can see that's what I get. So I'm just going to turn that back down so that I only get one tree. Okay, now let's say I don't like this tree and it's not very nice shape, and I want to see a different tree. I can just change the seed here, and I can just pick the one that I do like. So you can see we get lots of different permutations, and this is basically a random algorithm, and it's basically picking different ways to grow. And so we could actually pick a starting point by changing the seed. Okay, so that's really useful. So the next one is draw order, and that's not really that important these days. It's basically for the rendering of the paint effects, and we don't really need that anymore. With surface offset, we can actually offset the stroke, so you can see it's going up and down. This is more useful when you're painting on an object, but in this case you can see what it's doing. And then we've got smoothing, which is great for if you've got some sort of calligraphy or if you're using a artistic stroke. So if we had some kind of stroke here, this is going to basically smooth out this line. So if I just scroll this up, you can see it's basically smoothing this line. So I'm just going to turn that back down. It's not going to affect this at all. So if we go into the brush now, we can actually change the way this thing looks. So if we go up, we've got the global scale here. So if we wanted to change the size of this and we weren't happy with the size, we can actually change this up and down. Then we've got the brush profile, which we'll take a look at a bit later, but basically that's going to make this wider. So if I just change this, you can see that it's moving to the left or right. So if I change this to something like 5, basically if you imagine a stroke being 5 units on either side of that line, that's basically what that means. So it's making it wider. We'll have a look at that in a minute when we use grass. Okay, so I'm just going to come down. So if we go down to tubes, we go down here to tubes. This is the main section that you'll probably be going in the most. And if you turn off tubes, you can see that your tree disappears. So you know that it's a tube. If you go in there, if you go to the creation section, you can actually adjust how this thing looks. So you can adjust the height, for example, by adjusting this slider here, and you can turn it up and down, and you can see that height changes. And this is the minimum and the maximum. So if you had a few different trees, they're going to be between that minimum and maximum. And then we can also change the amount of branches and stuff on there. So if we come down to growth, you can see branches are on. If we turn that off, the branches disappear. The twigs are on, and you can see that they appear and disappear. And the leaves are on and off, so you can see that they disappear as well. And so parameters for each of those things are in each of these sections, and I'm not going to go over all of those. You can see that there's a lot of parameters, but it's pretty intuitive and you can actually go in here and just have a little play. But I'm just going to make this a little bit more dense by going into twigs, and I'm just going to slowly just increase this to 2, maybe 3, so I just get a little bit more leaves there. Do that slowly so that you don't increase the polygons too much, just in case your computer can't handle it and it's going to crash. Okay, so we've got more polygons there, and let's have a look at putting some animation on this. So if I select this guy and go down to behavior, so this is in the tube section. Let's just open this up. Let's close all this stuff up here. So inside tubes, behavior, turbulence, you can basically turn on the animation. So if I change this to, it's actually on already, but if I change this to tree wind, and then I'm going to turn up the number of the amount of turbulence, and then rewind and play, it should play. But in this case it's not playing because we're on viewport 2.0, and sometimes it doesn't work inside there. So I'm just going to change this back to legacy, and we should be able to see this animating. So the difference between tree animation and grass animation is that basically if I change this to grass, you'll see that the leaves are the only thing that move. If I press play, and you can see that the branch moves all as one piece, right, and it moves a little bit less, so it's a little bit different. You can see that these guys are moving a bit more. I prefer that in terms of movement. We've got way too much turbulence here, so I'm just going to turn this down. Okay, so frequency is the amount, how quickly it's actually going to change. If I deselect that. Okay, so we've got our tree, but this won't actually render inside Mental Ray. So in most renderers like Arnold, Mental Ray and V-Ray, this won't render. So this will render in Maya Software. Nobody really uses Maya Software anymore, so we're going to be going over to Mental Ray, press render, and you can see that we can't see our render. So we have to turn this into polygons. So we have to select this object, go to modify, convert, and then paint effects to polygons, go to the options and just make sure quads is on, and then say convert. It's got a polygon limit there, so if you have got a really dense mesh you might want to increase that, but in this case it should be okay. So I'm going to click on convert. Once it's converted, you'll see a group here, and you'll see 2 different mesh items. So we've got the branches there, and then we've got the leaves as a separate object. Okay, and if we turn on textured view here, we should be able to see the texture a little bit as well. this texture here is not showing correctly, but if I change it to viewport 2.0, you should be able to see it a bit better there. Okay, and then if we press render, we should get something now, so we can actually see it in Mentoray there. Okay, so we'll make that look a bit more realistic in a minute. So now let's create some more objects. So I'm just going to create a camera first of all. So I'm going to go to create. So go to create, cameras, camera, and then look through that. Just going to zoom out a little bit. Turn on my resolution gate here by pressing this button, and just put this, make a nice composition here. Maybe on this side. And I'm just going to change the seed of my brush here. So the cool thing about this is the history is still there. So if I press play, this is still animated. Okay, until you delete your history, this is still connected. So that's really cool. So I can still adjust this. I can still go to the stroke here and go up, and I can change the seed here. So if I don't like that brush, I can change it. Let's just see something a bit more interesting. So I've got my tree the way I like it. So now that we've got that, we can use another brush to create some grass. Okay, so let's go to the Get Brush. Go to the Grass folder. And then I'm going to use one called Grass Wind Wide. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that. And then I'm going to do a stroke near the front here. I'm going to use a different grass for the back. So let's just click around the front here. So I'm just going to do that. Okay, and then what we're going to do is adjust this so that it fills out the scene a bit more. So if you look at this, if I just go to my perspective, you can see I've only got a little bit of grass there, and it's quite thick as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this look a lot more fuller by adjusting the stroke. So I'm going to select this guy, go to Attribute Editor, and then we're going to go to the stroke here, and we're going to change the density in just a second. But before we do that, let's just make this stroke wider. So if you look at this, it's this wide at the moment. If we go to the brush and change the brush profile, we can make that wider, and you can see what's happening there. So I'm just going to change that to something like 10, and now you can see it's filling a bigger area there. I think that should do for us. So I'm going to change that to 10, and then I'm going to go to the stroke, and you can see it's a little bit sparse now, so we can just change that to sample density of 3 maybe, or let's just look through the camera and then we can see this a bit better. So I'm going to go to my camera 1, and so I'm just going to click away just so I can see this a bit better. So there's our stroke. We need them to be a little bit thinner, I think, so let's just grab these guys, and I'm just going to change this to 5, and then go back to the grass brush here, and we'll go down to tubes again, and inside tubes creation we should have the width here, tube width, these two, and what we'll do is just take this down, and you can see them getting thinner there. So let's take that down. It's going to look much more realistic if it's a bit thinner. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So you can see that that's a bit sparse. If you want to change your background color, you can use Alt B. So you can see that's a little bit sparse there. So I'm going to make it a bit more dense again. Go back to the stroke, change the density to something like 20. It should have a bit more now. There we go. So if you've got a slightly less powerful computer, just keep this fairly low for now, just so you understand what's going on. It may crash if your graphics card isn't that good. So just be aware that this is quite a high polygon. If you want to, you can select this and go to Draw as Mesh, and then it's going to be a little bit quicker to update there. So you can see that's just drawn as curves there. Okay, so I'm going to go to my camera again, and we'll just give that a quick render. Actually, that's not going to render because it's not a polygon, so we're going to turn that into a polygon, and this is going to be quite a few polygons here. So let's just see. Go to Modify, Convert. It's best to save your scene before this if you were going to do this. So I'm going to go Paint Effects to Polygons, and I'm just going to change this to 2 just in case I haven't got enough polygons there. So 200,000 there. Convert. Okay, so there's our polygons. And what it does is it hides the stroke when it creates the polygons. Okay. If your computer is a bit slow, what you can do is you can add this to a display layer, this button here, and it's going to create a new display layer and add this object to that. And you can right click on that and say attributes just off the screen here. So click on, let's just make this a bit bigger so we can see this. Right click, attributes, and we can change this to bounding box, or you can turn off shading on that layer and it will go a little bit faster and it will still render correctly. So you can change this to bounding box and it's going to be a little bit quicker to draw there. Okay, my computer is fine at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it, but just so you know, I do know that this does slow down your scene. Change that back to full. Okay, so now I'm going to do the background grass, and I'm going to use another brush here. So let's go to generate, get brush, and this is going to be creating some sprites for us, some cards, and they're going to be facing the camera. So if we go to trees mesh, go to oak forest and click on that, and what this is going to do is going to create these little cards that are going to just always face us. Make sure you're in your camera when you create this, because that's what gets connected to the paint stroke. Okay, so I'm going to just click behind here and just click around. Okay, something like that. And then I'm going to convert this to polygons so we can see what we're doing. So modify paint effects to polygons, and now you should see your stroke there. So I'm just going to select this and I'm going to isolate it. Click on this button here. So now you can see just that stroke. And what you do is, what happens is that if you move this camera, you can see that it's always facing us. Okay, I'll just come up here. You'll see these rotate at some point. These look like they're connected to the perspective. So if I were to go to the perspective and move around, there you go, now they're facing us. Okay, so you can see them changing. We could connect this back up in the node editor if we wanted to, but I'm not going to do that right now. Let's just go to camera, and I'm just going to change my camera back here. Back to a decent view. Something like that. Okay, and let's change this picture. So this is basically, so you can see it's a polygon and it rotates to face us. So we're just going to change the picture on this to look like some grass. So I'm going to download a picture. I'm just going to go to the internet. Go to images. And I'm going to use this one here. So I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to drag that onto the desktop. Okay, so I've saved that. And then I'm going to use that image. So if I grab this guy, he's got a shader attached. So whenever you convert something to a polygon, it's going to have a separate shader. Normally these paint effects do not have shaders. They're built into the actual shape node. You can actually adjust the shading parameters on the shape node. But in this case, it's a polygon. So you can see that the shader is attached. So you can see this is a Phong shader. And we're going to come up here and go to the file here. This is the file that's being used. It's the oak tree texture. We're going to click on that, and if we go to the desktop where I saved that grass, I'm going to grab that grass, and you can see it's got an alpha there. You could create your own here by just rendering some of these grass clumps by themselves with an alpha, and you can use that if you wanted to. I'm going to say open. So now we've got our grass clumps, and we just need to adjust the settings on these a little bit. So I'm going to just adjust my view so that my horizon is a bit more in the distance. And then I'm going to just adjust my viewport 2.0 settings. So I'm going to go to settings here, and you can see that these things are not being drawn correctly on top of each other. So the best way to just deal with that is to change this to depth peeling, which is a different way of drawing it. And now you can see that these things get drawn correctly. So it's just better they're on top of each other rather than the ones that are behind being on top. So I'm going to grab this, and we'll do what we did earlier. We'll make the stroke a bit wider. So we're going to go to the brush here, go back to brush width, make it wider. Just going to make that to 5. Okay, something like that. You can see that it's wider now, filling a wider area. Now we need to change the density, so we'll just go to the stroke, and you can come up here and grab that. You can see these are the strokes and this is the mesh there that it created. So I'll grab that stroke and we're going to change the density here to 5. So that's a lot denser. May just change it a bit higher maybe. Okay, so 20 seems to be okay. And what I'll do is I'm just going to adjust the variation on this. So I'm going to make these a little bit more random by changing the heights. So I'll go back to the brush here. And then I'm going to come down to tubes. And in the creation parameters here, creation tubes, we've got the length here. So if I just take the first one and bring it down, some of the tubes are going to get shorter, as you can see. Okay, you can see it's cutting off some of these pictures. If I just zoom in a bit, you can see that some of these images are getting cut off. And the way to deal with that is to actually select your object, and then we're going to go to generate, and we're going to go to mesh quality attributes. It's just off the screen here. Let me just tear this off so you can see this. So mesh quality attributes, and this is basically a shortcut to get to the mesh quality in the stroke, but it's just a little bit easier to find. And I'm going to change this tube sections from the segments from 8 to 1. So watch this. If I change this to 1, I now get just one piece there, and now you can see that the image is correctly mapped there. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So you can see that covers a nice wide area, and this is used all the time in movies and video games and stuff to cover a wide area nice and quickly. Okay, so now I'm going to create some random variation by creating another stroke, which is going to cover this with a few little bits of details. I'm going to use the auto paint feature for that. So if I create a plane and just make it bigger, let's just see this properly here. I'm going to make this plane wherever I want my randomness to be, so I'm just going to move this over here. Okay, so what it's going to do is going to cover this plane with some strokes. So I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to grab from the plants menu. You can pick anything you want to really. I'm just going to pick ground cover, so I'm going to grab that. And then I'm going to select my object, and we'll go to generate auto paint, paint random, and I'm going to go to the options here. Let's just reset this. So you can see by default it basically will distribute a bunch of strokes automatically across this object. So I'm just going to increase the amount of those. So I'm just going to say maybe 8 and 8, and you can adjust these parameters. This is the length of the stroke, so let's just see how that looks first. So now you can see it's made a bunch of strokes across there. Maybe that's a bit too much. I just want a few different strokes. I'm just going to undo that. So I'm going to change that to 4 and 4 like the defaults, and change the stroke length to something less, so 0.2, and then I'll do paint. I'm not selecting an object there, so it didn't work, so I'll just try that again. Auto paint, paint random options, and then paint strokes. There we go. Okay, so I just need to adjust the size of this. When you use the auto paint command, you can see you get a bunch of strokes, but they share the same brush. So this ground cover brush, if I go up to the global scale, watch all of them, they're all going to scale at the same time, so that's quite handy. So it makes it easier to manage. Okay, so there we go. So I'm just going to convert those to polygons. Select those, convert those to polygons. So let's see what this stuff looks like when we render it. So I'm going to just create a physical sun and sky system. So I'm going to go to my render settings, Now I'm using mental ray here, so in the scene section, camera, environment, we're going to create a physical sun and sky system. I'm going to click on create. So let's have a look at that. If I click on this, you can see now that we have a light in there. And if I turn on this, this is the shadows. So if I turn that on, you can see we get shadows. I'm just going to rotate my light. We get a directional light here. And I'm just going to rotate that so that we change the position of the sun. You can move this just so we can see this here. It doesn't matter where it is because it's a directional light. And I'm just going to rotate it this way. Remember with these sprites, they're not actual geometry, so you do have to have it sort of facing it, otherwise they don't render properly because they're only just cards. They don't light correctly because they're just fake cards. So you do need to have some light on them for them to actually render. So I'm just going to press render there. Final gather is automatically enabled when you render that, so you can see that they're rendering. I can see already a problem, which is basically the translucency is too high. So I'm just going to escape this. And this is what you normally get with these brushes. So you can see the color of this and the color of this is different. So I'm going to select the stroke, and I should have a shader here, and that's the Fong shader. And if I come down to translucence, if I just select this, you can see this while I'm doing it. Now we can see that it's a little bit better. So if we just turn that down a little bit, it's normally a bit too high, so it looks a bit too self-illuminated. And normally you do have to change the color of this stuff as well, just to make it a little bit less saturated. So this green here is a little bit too green. I think normally in the real world it's a little bit grayer. So if you just take this down, and you'll find that with most of these it's the same thing. If I just change the translucency down here, they also have reflectivity on here. I'm not going to turn that down right now because it does look okay, but if you want to, if you find that it's getting overlit, you can actually turn your translucency down as well. So I'm just going to turn it down on the leaves here, and they're probably getting multiplied by color as well. So if I go to color, you can see there's a ramp here which is multiplying the actual image. If I double click here, you can see the image. So I'm just going to change that color to be white so that the image isn't being tinted. So there we go, that's a little bit less green. And now I'm going to give it a render. So this is what we've got, and I'm just going to change a couple of settings. So this grass here is a bit too shiny, so it's got some reflections on it, so it's going a bit white, and it doesn't match with this grass over here. And this bark is a little bit too bright as well, so we'll turn down the translucence and a few parameters on there as well. So I'm just going to come over here, and I think the leaves are a bit too dark at the moment, so maybe just change the diffuse up a little bit just so that they get lit a bit more. And we'll grab the grass, and I'm going to just change the reflectivity down to 0 because it looks okay here, so that means that the reflections are probably affecting that. And I'm just going to take my plane, and you can put a texture on this if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm going to just grab this plane, and I'm going to assign a Lambert to this and just make it green, and then select the bark, go to the color. So this is the actual texture that's applied to your bark, and you can see that there's no texture there, so that's not very good. So what we want to do is actually put in a file texture. So I'm going to download one. I'm just going to break this connection. Let's go to the internet. Okay, so I've just typed in bark texture, and I'm going to grab this guy, and I'm just going to download that onto my desktop. Okay, so now in the shader, I'm just going to click on this little icon here. I've broken the connection by right clicking and saying break connection. So I'm going to click on this and go to file, and then pick the bark texture from the desktop here. Just going to zoom in, You can see the repetitions there, so I'm just going to change those. Go back to the texture here. This place 2D node is where you control the repetitions. So if I change this to 2, see how that looks. I'm going to select this and then just need to repeat this in the right direction. Okay, so I'm going to say 4 in this direction and 1 in this direction. That's a bit better. Maybe 0.5 in this direction. That's better. Okay. Right, so now we've got a bit of texture on there. Okay, so I'm just going to change my view here. If you want, you can bring up your resolution gate as well. Make a nice composition. This spark shader has also got translucency on as well, so you might want to turn that down a little bit. And then the reflectivity is up as well, so maybe turn that down a little bit as well. So I'm just going to render this. You could obviously go a lot further and put maps into the specular and the bump and all that stuff, but this is basically just a tutorial just to show you how to get going and make it a little bit more realistic than the default settings that you get. So this is still coming out a little bit white, so I just need to change this. I'm going to grab this guy and I'm just going to change the color here just to make it a bit darker. And let's make it a bit denser as well, so I'm just going to go to the stroke here, up here, and make it a bit denser maybe. Let's try 40. So these are the colors that I put into the grass there. You can adjust those depending on if you want them to be light or dark. I've got them a little bit darker here. And of course you can put in an HDR image into the background if you wanted to, so you can get rid of your physical sun and sky by deleting this and creating an image-based light, and then using a HDR that you've downloaded and using a sky that's actually a picture. That also makes it look a bit more realistic. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. We've got some really cool videos coming up, so please like and subscribe. And if you want to see the full course, you can click on the link below and you'll get a discount. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.